David and I cooked up this idea for 15 in response to the Obama administration calling for raising the minimum wage to $9 an hour from $7.25. And we were like, if these are our friends, who needs enemies?
Wow.
Right? Like,
I love it.
You know, like if this is the best the president of the United States can do, we need a new plan. The number 15, it sounds like a lot to people. But if the minimum wage had tracked productivity gains, it would be 22 or something like that. And
so it's crazy if you look at those curves.
That's right. And so we knew that 15 was a relatively conservative number on a historical basis. It's actually halfway between the inflation number and the productivity number.
But it seems like a very significant leap forward because at the time,
But by rights, it should be $25 nationally today.
Yes.
I mean, and to be clear, Andrew, if it was, we would live in a very different country.
Very different.
Wouldn't we? Yeah. We would live in a very different country, both economically and politically, because a lot of the economic division that we're experiencing is a consequence of the anger that has been created by the just objective truth of most people getting screwed over the last 40 years. Right? And some people lean left and some people lean right, but the anger is totally valid and we have to deal with it.
Welcome back to Yang Speaks. This is your co-host, Zach Grauman. On our episode today, we've got Nick Hanauer. He's an entrepreneur, he's a venture capitalist, and he is an activist who does a lot of work on the minimum wage, which is super timely because we just passed this COVID relief bill and the minimum wage was not bumped to $15 an hour. So it's an interesting, timely conversation with Nick. But before we do that, guys, I want to pause. For those of you, I believe most of you should know, but if not, a man in Georgia, in Atlanta, Georgia, went on a killing spree and killed 8 people. 6 of them were Asian American women. And at this time we're recording, March 20th, the Atlanta Police Department has not confirmed this to be a hate crime, even though very, very much clearly was. And to make it worse, the police officer that made a statement was quoting the man who shot them. He said that man had a really bad day. It's a direct quote. And, obviously, people with bad days don't do things like this. I have bad days all the time. And this has gotten really bad. Violence against the AAPI community has spiked since the pandemic started. So the Stop AAPI Hate organization has recorded 3,795 hate incidents since the pandemic started in March 2020. Look, I'm a white male. I have not experienced racism personally anywhere close to any of my friends of color have. So my perspective is my perspective. But I will say on this campaign and working with Andrew, I spent a lot of time getting to know the AAPI community all over the country. A lot of time. In fact, when we were running for president, the only people that would really give us the time of day were the folks in the Asian American community. So some of my best friends and colleagues and mentors are Asian and part of this community. I've gotten to know them very well, and they are hurting this week. Andrew and Evelyn are hurting this week. I could hear it in their voices. I see it in their faces all week. And it crushes my heart. So I wanted to pause and pour my love and heart out to my Asian American friends. I hope you all can do the same. But I also know talk is cheap. So I want to do something. I'm going to donate myself personally. There's an organization I want you guys to know about. It's called Asian Americans Advancing Justice. They're an activist group. They do a lot of group work on the ground. So who responds to incidents like this? Who is reaching out to the families, but who also is educating members of the community how to prevent this? And this one's based, they've got an Atlanta chapter. So Asian Americans Advancing Justice. I'll put the link in the kind of description of this episode, but I'm going to donate. So if you can donate to either that organization or others you find that you think are doing great work, please do. And if you can't, I know it's a hard time for everybody. This is what Andrew recommended, and I agree. The best thing we can do is start to share our humanity more proactively. So the best thing you do is find somebody who doesn't look like you. Find somebody with a different skin color than you who doesn't look anything like you. And give them a smile. We must have a mindset of abundance and fix this deeply inhuman economy and society we have. It's important to have these moments when tragedy strikes so you feel that and share our humanity. Now, with that, let's get a little more positive. We're going to talk about some fun stuff on the podcast with Andrew. Nick Hanauer joins. He's a venture capitalist and entrepreneur. He's a really, really impressive individual, but he's done a lot of good, particularly on fighting for the minimum wage and just talking about it better, which is timely. It's topical. You're going to enjoy this one. I love you all. Enjoy the episode, folks. When I was in college, I used to take this super food green smoothie. I used to buy one every day, and they were great. And then I moved to Manhattan, can't afford them. It's like 50 times the price. So how I've substituted that out is with Athletic Greens. And I've been talking about them for a while, and they're awesome. It's this powder. You put it in water, put it in wherever you want. And you get, with one scoop, minerals and whole food source ingredients, including a multivitamin, multi-mineral, probiotic, green superfood blend, and more. And they all essentially work together to fill the nutritional gaps in your diet, increase your energy and focus, and aid with digestion and support a healthy immune system, which is important during COVID. And you don't have to take lots of other supplements. So right now, Athletic Greens is doubling down on supporting your immune system, and they're offering our audience a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. So if you visit our link today, you'll basically never have to buy vitamin D again. So visit athleticgreens.com/yang and join health experts, athletes, and health conscious go-getters around the world who make a daily commitment to health every single day. Again, athleticgreens.com/yang. Get your free supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs today.
It is my pleasure and thrill to welcome to the podcast someone I've been wanting to get on here for a while. Serial entrepreneur, civic activist, founder of Civic Ventures, Pitchfork Economics, rabble-rouser extraordinaire, Nick Hanauer. Nick, welcome.
Thank you, Andrew. It's so great to catch up with you.
Seriously. So, Nick, I became a fan of yours when you wrote that piece in Politico that I guess ended up kicking off the term Pitchfork Economics, where you were like, hey, FYI, the pitchforks are coming for us.
Yes, and they came.
And I was like, holy crap, somebody said it. Like, and it had to be someone like you who had incredible business success, had founded and invested in name brand companies. And so at one point you were like, I remember that article so well. You were like, look, guys, I'm in the top 1% and there are only so many pants I can buy.
Yeah, no, for sure. And Andrew, you know, when I wrote that article, I'd had a sort of a long-term interest in the issue of inequality that was spurred by this incredibly wonky thing that I know you'll appreciate because you're a little bit of a wonk yourself. Yes. So I got a look at the income shares that had the IRS captures that had gone back a long time. And what I discovered, I got to look at those in 2006 or 7, around then. And what you discovered when you look at those income share numbers was that in 1980, the top 1% of Americans shared about 8% of national income. And the bottom 50% of Americans shared about 18%. That was in 1980. In 2007, the share of income for the top 1% had risen to something like 22 or 23%, while the share of income for the bottom 50% of Americans had fallen from 18% to 12%. And I simply took those numbers and stuck them in a spreadsheet and said, what happens if this happens for another 30 years? And the answer was Armageddon. You know, like the problem is that if the income for the top 1% goes from 23 to 45 and the income for the bottom 50% goes from 12 to 6 or 5%, which is where I think the numbers took you, it's really super clear that you're not living in a capitalist democracy anymore. You're living in some sort of feudal police state.
Yes.
Yeah. And I was just like, holy shit, like if this doesn't change, we're in deep, deep, deep trouble. And of course, from 2007 on, things didn't get better. They got worse.
Oh, yeah.
And
they
here
got
we are.
dramatically worse. And one thing that was so powerful about that article, which in my mind was like this opening salvo, because you've done all of this incredible work since then, making the same case. But you were one of the first people to just come out and debunk the entire, hey, the top slice of taxpayers are like enormous job creators.
Yes. Yeah. And so, at the same time, sort of like you, I got this terrible urge to understand where economics had gone wrong. Because up to that point, the economic profession had been saying that all of the policies that had led to this enormous amount of concentration of wealth at the top were good for everybody.
Yep.
Right? Like that.
Rising tide, lifting all boats.
That's right. Like, raising wages kills jobs. Therefore, we shouldn't raise the minimum wage. Rich people are job creators. The more money we have, the more jobs we create. People are paid their marginal product, which is to say, if you make $7.25 an hour, that's because you're only worth $7.25. There's always a trade-off in economic efficiency. If you increase justice or fairness in human societies, sort of the canon of neoliberalism, and my intuition was that this was all nonsense, right? Because when you look at neoliberalism for what it is, it effectively amounts to a protection racket for the very rich. If you take neoclassical economics and neoliberalism seriously, there's only one thing that can happen, is that the rich will get richer and everybody else will get poorer. And so, like you, I began a journey to try to essentially figure out where we went wrong and to try to do things that could get us back on track.
Yeah. So the big theme for this conversation, and you are the perfect person to have it with, is what the fuck do we do?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because here you are, you're like a business titan. You have a platform, you make a very clear, rational case, which is correct. You point out some of the flawed ideological defense mechanisms that people have around like the current winner-take-all economy and its extremity. So you come out and you say these things that, and just about everything out of your mouth I've always agreed with. You fight for higher minimum wage in your own city that ends up helping to kick off a movement around the country. But I think you would agree with me, particularly during this pandemic, that the extremity is accelerating and getting worse and not somehow getting any better. And so, and you and I connected on this early on when I decided to run for president. I was like, okay, here's my approach. Here's my plan. Like, let's start giving everyone a certain amount of money to meet their basic needs. And we had some degree of success, but I'm really interested in what the heck you found while you've been pushing these causes through civic ventures and other measures. Like, how the heck can we turn things around?
To be clear, the answer to what to do to turn things around is very, very simple. Getting it done politically is very, very hard, but it does. So the answer, in my humble opinion, the answer is simply to require companies to pay their workers enough to live in security and dignity, and for rich people to pay enough tax to sustain the investments that make a democracy go. It is not complicated. And the thing that I want to emphasize is that if you take neoclassical economics seriously, then you also believe that all of the policies that you would impose to do these things are these efficiency killing job killers, right? And that, if there's a theme to what I want to say today on this podcast, is that is a lie. That all of that is utter nonsense. that the neoclassical economic models are rooted in assumptions about human behavior and the dynamics of human social systems that are just objectively false.
Nick, I'm just going to entertain you for a minute. I studied economics in college, and this is what I remember. Hang on, I'll show you.
Yeah, exactly. Supply and demand. Yeah. So Andrews, exactly. Supply and demand. Yeah, exactly. As wages go up, employment must come down. And that, and this is just utter nonsense that believing that. So if you accept the idea that the economy is this closed equilibrium Pareto optimal system, then anything you do to it actually decreases welfare for everybody. But the problem is the economy isn't that kind of system.
The invisible hand is not somehow like, omniscient and omnipotent and making it all happen.
No. And if there is an invisible hand, it has to do with cooperation, not competition. But the truth is that claiming that when wages rise, jobs have to fall would be the equivalent of claiming that when plants grow, animals shrink. This is obviously nonsense. It's not the way it works. In fact, when plants grow, so do animals.
Yeah.
And then plants, right?
More food, for sure.
Because it's an ecology and there is an ecological relationship between wages and business growth and hiring. When workers have more money, businesses have more customers and hire more workers.
You had empirical experience with this, obviously, in that you kicked off the $15 an hour minimum wage in Seattle and then got data. So can you tell us about how that movement has gone and grown? And I know it seemed like we were this close to widespread adoption, depending on, you were closer to it than I am in terms of what that voting looked like in the Senate, it seemed.
Yeah. So, but I just want to emphasize that we've been raising the minimum wage in the United States of America since 1938. We've done it federally 22 times. And in 0 of those cases, did jobs go down, unless the country was in recession. We've also raised the minimum wage hundreds of times in cities and states over the last 80 or 90 years. And in 0 of those cases, did wages go down. The thing that's remarkable is that because of this economic theory, because of this academic economic theory that sees the economy in this sort of zero-sum relationship, it was not until 1994 that economists even bothered to check to see if jobs went down after wages went up.
There's a lot of very strange groupthink.
It's just astonishing. And then this marvelous guy named Alan Kruger and his friend David Carr did a study comparing New York to New Jersey, where New Jersey raised wages and New York didn't, and discovered, and their intent in doing this empirical analysis was to characterize how much raising the minimum wage killed jobs. And they discovered, to their horror, that not only didn't jobs go down, they may have gone up. And this kicked off a giant kerfuffle in the academic economics profession, where a Nobel Prize winning economist named James Buchanan in the Wall Street Journal referred to Carr and Kruger as a bevy of camp-following whores.
Wow.
For having the temerity to challenge what he called the bedrock principle of economics, that if wages rise, employment must fall. If you can get the world to believe that when you raise wages for workers, employment falls, and you are, to quote unquote, harming the very people you're intending to help, then you are given both practical and moral permission to keep wages low and profits high.
You realize that there truly are these ideological bulwarks or defense mechanisms
Absolutely.
trying to keep people. And I ran into versions of it over and over again all over the country. If I had a choice between something like universal basic income and higher minimum wage, I would choose universal basic income. But if I don't get universal basic income and the choice is raise the minimum wage, then I'm all for raising the minimum wage.
And I'm on exactly the other side of that trade, mostly because I'm a serial entrepreneur and capitalist, right? So I really do believe in capitalism. I do believe that it is a great economic system, the best ever devised. But I also simultaneously believe that it is ridiculous and, unforgivable to believe that, and also believe that the whole system will come tumbling down if companies are required to pay their workers enough to live in dignity without food stamps, right? Like, it's nuts. There is there is nothing that prevents every company in America, particularly every big company, from paying their workers enough to get by without food stamps.
I mean, heck, some of these companies are then just churning to public subsidies and food stamps, being like, "Hey, we're exploiting workers, but don't worry, you can here's a phone number for food stamps." I mean, it's really dark. It's very dark.
That's right. It's terribly dark, and we don't really have capitalism, true capitalism in this country. We effectively have socialism for the rich. That like most people who get government assistance aren't unemployed. They're employed. They have jobs. Their employers just don't pay them enough money. And why don't they pay them enough money? Because we collectively have left them off the hook. Because we have been persuaded by this neoliberal nonsense that if Walmart was forced to pay their workers enough to get by without food stamps, somehow the whole system will come tumbling down. Meanwhile, Walmart, to use but one example, spends approximately as much, about $6 billion a year, just on stock buybacks as their employees receive in public assistance.
Wow.
It's just crazy. It's nuts. And so the thing about UBI, I have no problem with UBI. I just think that I can't defend this. It just pisses me off. I just think that the easier and quicker path to get America back on track are a set of labor standards that require companies to pay people enough to get by. And if we did that, almost all this problem would go away. That's my view.
I think one of the reasons why I'm on the other side of that was that, I looked at the political possibility of changing the labor standards along the way you suggest, and reforming what I see as as you suggest, a very, very deranged version of capitalism. And I thought, which of these two things do I think we could make happen? And you've been working on one for quite some time, and it's one reason why I want to hear from you, how we move that forward. And then I jumped in with this other version, in part because, but I'm with you in the sense that that we are living in a world where very large corporations and certain types of individuals are being treated incredibly favorably and generously by our system. And then we're looking around saying rugged individualism for folks who are working at Walmart and the rest of it.
That's right. It's just crazy. Here's another canonical example that people are using right now is that the bailout of the airline industry in the pandemic. Right? Well, so the public, taxpayers effectively, gave the airline industry $50 billion to help tide them through this difficult circumstance. But in the prior 5 years, the airline industry spent collectively about $65 billion on their own stock, returning money to shareholders and to themselves.
Yeah.
Right? So
in a way, we're just pumping all this money essentially to shareholder buybacks. We
subsidized these selfish, short-sighted shitbags, because, we've got to save the industry and protect the workers. So, you
could have protected the workers, by sending the workers money. You could have done that. That's what I was.
Exactly. And, as Scott Galloway points out frequently, we should be kind to people and merciless to companies.
Part of the problem here, Nick, is that we find it much easier to find the companies and shove money into their hands than we do find the people.
But all of that is a consequence of 45 years of neoliberal policy, of getting effectively economics upside down by mistaking who the true job creators in a market economy are. It's middle and working class people who earn enough to get by and thrive and consume, but also have the economic security to improve their circumstances, to get good educations, to effectively raise kids. Like when I consider how hard it was for me and my wife to raise functioning kids, given our circumstances.
That's actually what got me to run for president, Nick. When my wife and I had our first son, and it just beat the shit out of us so bad, and I was just like, there are two of us. we're like competent. We have resources, and this kid is kicking our ass. And then I was like, how the heck does a single mom like do this? And then that's what made me run for president.
The only reason it requires superhero-dom to do that is because we have let these giant corporations off the hook. Because if those companies were required to pay those folks enough to live in security with one job, it would be possible.
This episode of Yang Speaks is brought to you by Parachute, and I cannot shut up about Parachute. Like, wouldn't shut up about it so much that my sister-in-law just got, she's moving in a new house, and she just bought a bunch of things on Parachute's website, and they're awesome. I have their sheets. I have their towels. I don't know how else to explain it. It's like it's like sleeping on a freaking cloud. It's so fluffy and lovely. I get out of the shower, wrap myself into like the bathrobe situation. Ugh, it's amazing, guys. Seriously, Parachute is unbelievable. They believe in making home your happy place. And trust me when I say this, it actually does make it a bit of a happy place. It is worth every penny. So visit parachutehome.com/yang for free shipping and returns on Parachute's very comfortable premium quality home essentials. You will not regret it. It's amazing. The quality cannot be beat. You'll feel, you'll just feel like you're wrapped in joy all the time. It's pretty awesome. Parachutehome.com/yang.
So you're talking about this economic orthodoxy and neoliberalism that I agree there has been some kind of very strange, almost cultish acceptance of certain ideas.
Yeah.
And you yourself got a philosophy degree, I want to say, at a college, and you did not get an MBA or any of that jazz. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, and then you had...
but I did read all the books, just to be clear.
No, don't worry about it. Like, but I'm just suggesting this in part because I feel like you weren't acculturated in a particular way. It's like a lot of the folks that end up just imbibing this stuff, like studied maybe economics at college, maybe they got an MBA at Harvard, maybe they went out there. And there's a lot of that. Whereas you were studying like Kant and
That's right.
And
I think you're really right. If you go to Harvard Business School or Stanford Business School, they teach you from day one that the only purpose of the corporation is to enrich shareholders.
Maybe one of the most destructive ideas in human history.
That's right. And for folks listening to the podcast, what's really important to remember about that claim is that it wasn't that Milton Friedman first made that claim in 1972, and it got enshrined into policy and culture and everything else, and certainly corporate behavior. But Milton Friedman was making a much broader claim than it sounds. He didn't just he wasn't effectively saying, screw working people. The only thing you have to worry about is enriching yourselves. He made a much broader claim, which is if you screw working people and only worry about yourselves, that will be good for everyone, including working people. That was the big claim, right? Is that his claim was that by maximizing value for shareholders, the entire society would benefit, including the workers who got screwed. And people bought it. I mean, it's hard to believe, but they bought it.
Very pervasive, because
That's right.
It came out of Harvard Business School, and everyone was like, well, like the Harvard people are saying this, so...
Yeah, sounds good to me. Will my bonus be better?
Talk about your engagement with policy, because I'm really curious myself, really. And because I think that you and I have a lot in common.
So as you know, I run an enterprise called Civic Ventures, which is sort of my version, my wife and our version of philanthropy. And instead of just giving dough away to the United Way or, the local hospital, what we try to do is create structural change at the intersection of policy and politics. And one of the anchor strategies or assumptions that we make about social change in America is that all important big change starts locally. So whether it was the 8-hour day or marijuana legalization or given what, you pick the big policy. It started in a city or state, established the policy, proved that it worked, then it went bigger. And so what we do is look for transformational opportunities that can catalyze national action, but that we can try first in either our city or state or another.
So fun. You're like the civic innovation lab, and you look around and say, all right, we're going to roll out a $15 an hour minimum wage, which you did in Seattle. What year?
That was 2013. In 2012, our partners at SEIU had workers go on strike for 15 around the country. And at the same time, we started a campaign to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour in a small town called SeaTac, just out of Seattle. And so we sort of pioneered the idea, ran the initiative campaign, and won by like 60 votes or something like that in this small town. But that effort completely transformed the mayor's race that was happening at the same time in Seattle. And so the guy that was got elected mayor got elected on a platform of raising the minimum wage to 15 in Seattle. And he created a working group that I was part of. There were 20 people, and my colleague David Rolfe co-chaired it. He co-chaired it, and we pushed through 15. I don't know, 90 days later or something like that in Seattle.
Wow.
Yeah. And then it turned out that Seattle did not slide into the ocean, and it did not rain cats and dogs and stuff like that.
It actually did quite well, didn't it?
That's right. And then, unemployment fell from 5.9 to 3.9% in the following 2 years. And then it went to San Francisco and then, around the country, which is how social change happens. David and I cooked up this idea for 15 in response to the Obama administration calling for raising the minimum wage to $9 an hour from $7.25. And we were like, if these are our friends, who needs enemies?
Wow.
Right?
I love it.
If this is the best the president of the United States can do, we need a new plan. And so just between us chickens, well, I guess it's a podcast, so everybody will know. We never expected to win. So the number 15 sounds like a lot to people, but if the minimum wage had tracked productivity gains, it would be 22 or something like that. And
it's crazy if you look at those curves.
That's right. And so we knew that 15 was a relatively conservative number on a historical basis. It's actually halfway between the inflation number and the productivity number.
But it seems like a very significant leap forward because at the time,
But by rights, it should be $25 nationally today.
Yes.
I mean, and to be clear, Andrew, if it was, we would live in a very different country.
Very different.
Wouldn't we? Yeah. We would live in a very different country, both economically and politically, because a lot of the economic division that we're experiencing is a consequence of the anger that has been created by the just objective truth of most people getting screwed over the last 40 years. Right? And some people lean left and some people lean right, but the anger is totally valid, and we have to deal with it.
All right, this episode of Yang Speaks is brought to you by The New Yorker. I don't know if you guys watched the HBO documentary on Allen v. Farrow. It's fascinating. But one of their best journalists at The New Yorker is Ronan Farrow, and he's a genius. The New Yorker is just one of the better places where you can get real deep dives into specific topics and stuff I've always been interested but haven't particularly spent time on reading. So I read 2 articles that I found fascinating. I found one about American Christianity and how it's shaped, frankly, and gone to places that I didn't think Christianity was going to. And it's really become very political in a weird way. And then that was called The Wasting of an Evangelical Mind. And then the other one I read was called Email is Making Us Miserable, which it is. So this type of stuff you get from The New Yorker, which is fascinating. So here's the deal. For a limited time, you can get 12 weeks of The New Yorker for just $6. That's a savings. You get 50% off. It's awesome. Plus, listeners of our show will receive an exclusive tote bag to carry around for free. So go to newyorker.com/yang. That's NEWYORKER.com/yang to get 12 weeks in New Yorker for $6 and a free tote bag. newyorker.com/yang.
Well, I love the vision, and one of the reasons why I love it is that it just values people's time at a more appropriate rate. One of the reasons why, like, I'm pro universal basic income relative to other measures is that it values some of the time that right now doesn't get considered as employment. And you know, like, for example, you know, if my wife is at home with our boys, then, you know, like that doesn't count. But,
zero in GDP calculation.
Yeah, zero in GDP.
Zero.
But the same principle applies where if you are elevating people's wages, you're just valuing people's time more. Like, one of the 100%. Reasons why I'm pro UBI is like you should just value people's time, like, intrinsically, and like so. But the principle is very similar. It's one reason why when you talk about you know, elevating these things, like I just imagine more human dignity, which there is immediately. So you surprise yourself and win. And then you're like, oh my gosh, like, we're getting this done in Seattle, and then that happens 90 days later.
That's right.
And then what happens, you know, next?
And SEIU drove it super hard and super successfully around the country.
Fight for 15. Yeah,
that's right. Mary Kay Henry did an extraordinary job in leadership there. CJ Grimes, who ran the National Fight for 15, was amazing, and a bunch of other people who I could mention, but. Then the question, to your point, is, Andrew, what's next, right? Because the minimum wage is like, it's a start, but there's 1,000 things that you can do. And I will tell you, in my opinion, what the second most important thing is that we have been fighting since 2014, I think, is the overtime threshold, speaking of time. So the overtime threshold is the threshold below which, if you work for more than 40 hours a week, they have to pay you time and a half. And in the day, like when we used to have a thriving middle class 40 years ago, that threshold covered not just 100% of hourly workers, but it also covered 62% of salaried workers, which means that effectively it covered almost everybody except the big bosses. Okay? And what happened over 45 years of neoliberalism is so people like me turned hourly workers into salaried workers and pitched them fake titles like assistant manager or director of,
you're on your way,
filing. Yes. And you get a business card. And then that standard fell and it just got updated. But as of last year, if you earned $23,600 a year or less, you got overtime. But that means if you earn $23,700 federally, and I call you assistant manager, I can make you work 70 hours a week and not pay you one more dollar than I was.
Keynes projected that we'd have like a 15-hour work week by now because we're so productive. And then he got the productivity number right, but our work week has just gotten longer and longer because of some of the things you're describing. Because someone's like, oh, you're there, and like work just kind of expands.
Yes, it does. It does. And because people like me employing other people had this enormous incentive to turn 3 40-hour-a-week jobs into 2 60-hour-a-week jobs, right? As if I don't have any limit on how hard I can press people to work, then what I want to do is get 2 people to work as much as 3 used to and pocket the difference, right? Imagine how profitable that is. Imagine how profitable that is. To have 1,000 people working 40 hours a week, and then presto magico, now you have 650 people working 60 hours a week for the same price.
I remember one of the
Yikes.
things that expanded the work week, and this is going to date me a little bit, but whatever, was BlackBerries. Like as soon as you had a BlackBerry, then people could get you anytime, and then obviously that morphed into smartphones, and people can get people anytime. And now, the work week goes on forever.
but one of the reasons the work week goes on forever is that all those people with BlackBerries were not protected by this labor standard, right? Because in the day, you couldn't get people to work at home. They'd be like, well, now you have to pay me overtime.
So is the plan to have the overtime threshold applied to salaried workers as well as wage workers?
Well, it is presently applied to salaried workers at $32,000 a year, which effectively is almost no salaried workers. But again, using this theory of local first change, in Washington state last year, we pushed through the nation's highest overtime threshold. I believe it is.
Tell us more.
And at full implementation, it will be at about $83,000. So what we are presently doing is putting pressure on the Department of Labor and the Biden administration to either enact a law or change the labor standard so that if you earn $83,000 a year or less, you are automatically entitled to overtime, pay it time and a half if you work more than 40 hours a week.
This would be transformative, and I will say it would be a job creator in many, many contexts, because someone would look up and say, wait a minute, I'm going to have to pay my workers overtime because right now they're working 55 hours a week, and that's time and a half. So how about I go employ like another set of people to try and keep everyone at 40?
That's right. And so one of the secrets to understanding why wages have not risen for a really long time is that if you can 40 million times across the economy turn 3 jobs into 2, well, you've taken 15 million jobs out of the economy, plus or minus, or 12 million jobs, or whatever it is, right? And this is why structural unemployment is so high, is because companies can get workers to work more hours without being forced to hire more people. And so everybody's just on this treadmill.
This episode of Yang Speaks is brought to you by BetterHelp. I am doing BetterHelp. I'm actually doing it once a week. It's like $90 a week, not even, for basically as many sessions as you want to schedule. And I talked to my person, let's call her Sarah. That's not her real name, but I won't share her real name. But I talk to Sarah all the time, once a week, and it's great. And we talk about a whole host of things, and you can do it too. So you can talk about depression, anxiety, stress, relationships, sleeping, trauma, family conflicts, anger, you name it. We kind of cover the gamut. So I really do encourage this, particularly in COVID, guys. Like, get this stuff out of your system. It is awesome. So here's our call to action for you. I want you to start living a happier life today and do what I'm doing. And as a listener, you'll get 10% off your first month by visiting our sponsor, betterhelp.com/yang. So join over 1 million people, and me too, who have taken charge of their mental health. That's betterhelp, HELP.com/yang.
So when you say that you launched this initiative in Washington state, what does that process look like?
On this particular policy change, we didn't have to pass an initiative. We simply had to persuade the Labor Department to change the standard. So
of the state of Washington, wow.
In the state of Washington. So that took, it took us about a year of strategizing, organizing, and political pressure and sort of narrative in the press. But if you want, the last time we raised the minimum wage in the state of Washington, we did it via initiative. Among other things that my team does is we run all the gun violence politics in the state. We stood up an organization called the Alliance for Gun Responsibility, and we have now passed 4 statewide initiatives and probably 25 laws to make the state safer from gun violence. But to pass an initiative, you need to write the law. You need to get the attorney general to essentially say it's okay and to assign it a ballot title. And then you need to collect about 350,000 signatures. And then you need to win the campaign. I have, Civic Ventures is a team of 9 political professionals that are absolutely world class at doing all of those things. And so we write the law, collect the signatures, run the campaign, raise the money.
So awesome.
And then do it again.
So you got a version of this passed in Washington State, where the overtime threshold changed. And what year was that?
Last January. It went into effect.
So recent.
But yeah. So overtime, we put a full court press on the Obama administration to change the overtime threshold. And to make an extraordinarily long story short, they came up short. That they went about half as far as they should have. And they did it at the very last minute of the second term. And and they didn't fully implement it. And as soon as the Republicans came into power, they killed it.
The Obama White House issued a report on the automation of labor, and they literally issued it it was something like December 29th, 2016 or whatever. It was the last day in office. They sent out a report being and
you're screwed.
Yeah, the report was very frightening. The report was and we're going to automate away 83% of jobs that where people get paid $20 or less at present. And it was turn the lights out.
See ya.
Yeah, so that was one of my experiences where I was whoa, it's dropped this bomb of a report on their way out of the office. So that stinks that obviously after Trump takes office, they're not going to adopt those changes.
It has not gone all the way to 83. It takes 4 years more. I think, it's a phase-in thing in Washington State, as it probably should be everywhere, just to give people a chance to accommodate it. But now we're driving hard to try to get the administration to adopt that standard nationally.
Wow. So is this a Marty Walsh thing, or is this a Joe Biden thing, or who's on this one?
Both. I mean, it's the Marty Walsh. I mean, we're talking to the folks who work for Marty Walsh in the Labor Department, but we're also circulating the idea of actually passing this legislatively between you and me. If I was Biden, I would want to try to pass this legislatively because just politically and economically, there is no policy that is available to Democrats that more directly benefits middle-class people. Do you know what I mean? The minimum wage is fantastic.
This would be a big deal for a lot of people.
But it would be a huge transformative deal for tens of millions of Americans, many of whom voted for Donald Trump in the last election, right?
Okay, Nick. So so what is the catchy name for this measure?
Well, it's overtime. And I guess what you're saying to me is that's a really crappy, not very catchy name.
Well, so I know. I am suggesting that, Nick,
which I'm admitting.
Because right now I'm let's champion overtime reform. People are what does that mean?
What is that?
Though I understand how incredibly transformative it would be positively. Wait! I've got it. All right. Fight for 40.
Fight for 40. That's a good, you know what? That's pretty goddamn good.
That's not bad, right? Because Fight for 15 was very, very successful and alliterative. And you hear it. So if you say Fight for 40.
A Star is Born. I think it's pretty good.
It's pretty good, right? Because you hear it and you're Fight for 40. You're $40 an hour. It's no, 40 hours a week. And then you're oh shit, 40 hours a week. Then it's and if you're working for more than that, then you should get paid overtime. And everyone will be hell yeah. Fight for 40, Nick.
I think that is absolutely terrific. More to come. On all the little buttons, we're going to have a little asterisk and say, bye, Andrew Yang.
No. No credit necessary. Just freaking, as long as it happens, I'll be very, very glad.
And one of the most encouraging things going is the Biden administration's, and, I think the Democratic Party's acknowledgement generally that this is a time for bold action.
Yeah. That's been what my conversations with them have also indicated.
Like they need to deliver the goods to people.
They have a window of time where the like government has to demonstrate that it can actually improve
do
things.
Shit.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And so, the time is ripe for, I think, a much more constructive dialogue about this particular thing. But anyway, I mean, like there's 1,000 little things. One of the things that, and I'm not sure how you feel about this, but one of my little bugaboos is non-competes. If you're earning $65,000 a year and hanging on by your fingernails, the last thing you're going to do is go to war with a lawyer over whether your non-compete is enforceable. And until recently, places like Jimmy John's were forcing people who made sandwiches for $7 an hour into signing non-competes too. But the thing about non-competes is it's just a way to move power from individuals to corporations. So imagine a world in which nobody ever had to sign a non-compete except maybe the CEO, which meant that at any point you could offer your services and skills to the people across the street who are competing. Well, guess what happens to wages, right? They go up a lot for a lot of people.
For the vast majority of workers, the non-compete should not be appropriate. I totally agree with this. So keep going. We've got those three because I personally think the fight for 40 is something that we really should be driving hard because that would be a game changer, would create millions of jobs like around the country, I'm thinking, or would like see a lot more money go into people's hands.
100%.
It's so benign. Like most people looking up would be like, sure, like fight for 40. Who's not going to be for that?
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And it does two things. It creates millions of jobs, but it also increases lots of, millions and millions and millions of people's wages, not just, Andrew, because they all of a sudden earn overtime, but even more because their employers are like, look, it is too complicated to track this. You make 70, I'm raising you at 83 just so I don't have to deal with this.
You're like
anymore,
a lot of people
right?
be making 83.
Yeah, exactly. There would be a lot of people in America. Anybody between 65 and 83 would probably all of a sudden be making 83 or 83,001 or whatever. And that's to the good, right? Like that's an amazing, that's an amazing, yeah.
I think the threshold at which people's happiness reaches like a near optimal level is like 75,000. So you're trying to land at 83 actually makes a lot of sense from a human perspective. Just say it, just share it.
Yeah, but as you know, Andrew, there's so many things that we have to do to get the country back on track. We have to find a way to properly tax the very wealthy and use that money to make investments in the country. We have to pay people fairly, and we have to get we have to reform our democracy and make sure that this insane amount of voter suppression that the right is engaging in right now is headed off at the pass. It's super embarrassing.
Well, Nick, talking to you is very, very uplifting, which I knew it would be. I was very excited for a reason. If someone wants to follow you, support your work, hear your thoughts. You have written a couple of books, but your podcast is Pitchfork Economics. Like, how else can someone keep track of you and lend a hand to Civic Ventures or anything you're doing?
Yeah, well, I mean, Civic Ventures is, on the internet. I'm at Nick Hanauer on Twitter. If you're interested in a sometimes profane
I use the F word on his podcast.
Yeah,
I know about it. It's all good. Let the fight for 40 commence. If that becomes a thing, I'm going to be so proud, Nick. I'm not going to lie.
It's a really good idea. I'm being serious. As soon as I hang up, I'm going to run that by some people. I think it's incredibly clever.
Well, Nick, so glad to connect. Let's keep in touch. All the best in your quest to help people and families and workers get more of what they deserve in this economy. And hopefully we'll be able to celebrate some victories sometime soon.
I love it. Well, thank you for having me, Andrew. It's always so great to connect.